For Black History Month, let's talk about botany, right? And I don't mean the old George Washington Carver made peanut butter stories. I'm talking about Escape the Plantation botany, the swamp is my pharmacy botany, the kind of plant knowledge that made the U.S. government so uncomfortable that they are still trying to erase it today. You could call it survival botany, if you will. And, well, okay, so you ever notice how today's America treats black people like they showed up in, 1963, gave a speech and, yep, that's it, all better now, right? Yeah, things were bad, then white people felt bad, and then white people made a movie about feeling bad and, gave a couple speeches and we are good, right? Things got better. Anyway, for 300 years, Black Americans have been busy doing stuff, right? Botany stuff, like using plant knowledge to survive, resist, to build, in spite of every system designed to stop them. And somehow our history textbooks, they spent maybe a page on George Washington Carver's peanuts. But exactly 0 pages on the botanical knowledge that helped thousands of people survive slavery or escape slavery. And if those books did cover it, well, okay, that's nice. They're trying to take it all away now. So, I don't know, maybe we need to fix that. Today we're going to cover Enslaved Seed Saviors, swamp survivalists, and a 1960s farming genius who basically invented farmers market culture before Whole Foods, I guess, made it a fashion statement, right? And this episode will contain some mild roasting of white historical narratives because, hey, we've got to, right? And you can call it constructive criticism if you like. But 200 or 300 years ago, plantation owners, they controlled labor, time, bodies, families, and so on. But one thing that they seldom, if ever, controlled was little dooryard garden plots. And across the Americas, north and south, enslaved people cultivated these gardens just to survive, not for existence, sub-existence, if you will, or I guess you would call them subsistence plots, right? And these gardens grew things that were rarely, if ever, seen in the Americas before. Okra, black-eyed peas, sorghum, millet, sesame, yams, hibiscus. There was a whole host of medicinal herbs. Basically, foods and plants that were tied to West African agricultural systems. A West African grocery store, if you will, in someone's backyard, right? And by the way, there are things today that wouldn't even exist as we know them if not for those plants, right? Like Coca-Cola, if you need an example. But for black people, under the hell of slavery, these plants were not random foods. They were a piece of home. They were continuity, identity, maybe even a subtle act of resistance, right? Because imagine yourself ripped from the only home you've ever known, from family, from friends, forced into physical labor every hour possible under a baking sun, malnourished on scraps, often near death, and all your friends that you meet there are dying, and you're treated violently or worse. The smallest of comforts is all people had to get through that, even if it was just a little bit of warm food like you had when you were a safe child an ocean away. And these gardens were also, well, a nutritional strategy, right? Because the slaveholders were, let's say, not great at feeding their workers, right? Often the plantation owners, the reason that they didn't mind the gardens, let them grow their own food because now I am not responsible for feeding them, or for that matter, anything that they can make themselves. Hell, make your own cottage yourself, make your own clothes out of the plants, however you want to do it, for all I care, right? And it wasn't that they learned how to be farmers there. They were already expert agriculturists. I mean, hell, they often knew how to farm American crops and European crops long before being forced into slavery because I mean, those crops had made their way to Africa in the preceding century, thanks to the Portuguese and others. And and here's a fun one. There were entire rice plantations in South Carolina that only existed because the owners kidnapped people who actually knew how to grow rice. I'll put it this way. White plantation owners enslaved expert farmers and then took credit, of course, for the slaves' farming efforts, while simultaneously believing that those same people were inferior to them. And I guess it's a little like locking a Michelin star chef in your kitchen, serving some amazing mac and cheese to your guests and claiming, bask in my culinary genius, my guests. No, don't look at him. James over there, he ain't no chef. He just hacks stuff together, scraps and whatnot. I have fine dining in my blood. Well, okay, I supervised all this knowledge. It carried on through the decades too. If you need an example today, the Gullah Geechee people still exhibit a direct line back to those dooryard gardens with their language, their culture, and their farming techniques. But now, let's change topics from survival gardens on a plantation to how about gardens to survive away from the plantations? Because black people weren't just sitting still, right? They found a way to go off grid and get the hell away from our bullshit. And hey, sometimes the safest place from slavery was not north. It was inside a swamp. Welcome to the Great Dismal Swamp on the border of Virginia and North Carolina. It's a place so inhospitable that white colonists named it literally. That's great branding, you have to admit. Okay. Not bad for people who branded a genocide manifest destiny, okay? But let's not get into that. In fact, George Washington once tried to drain the place, and politicians, I guess, have just never been able to resist that metaphor ever since. Yeah. But enslaved runaways, they said, white people don't go there? I'm down, right? It's kind of like a good cookout, right? If there's oxtails, it might be cool. And if the potato salad has raisins in it, run. But a swamp, mosquitoes, peat bogs that sucked you in like quicksand. Before the 1800s, there were panthers. Today, there's still bears, poisonous snakes, spiders, disease. Did I mention mosquitoes, right? They chose malaria over us because we are so uncool. We just could not get the hint. They said, it's not me. It's definitely you, right? Anyway, these self-liberated people, they were called Maroons, from a Spanish word, cimarron, meaning wild and untamed. And they lived there for generations in the swamp. And nobody knows how many, right? Because some estimates were in the thousands. And they're not just wandering in, right? These are communities, houses, gardens, hunting parties, birthday parties. Freedom with mosquitoes. And I guess maybe some of you thought that they were just, standing there and taking it, whatever we were dishing out. Come on, right? Did you hear some nonsense that they were content with their lives as slaves? Yeah, no.
And you cannot tie imperialism and racism and slavery to just one race, which is pretty much what...
But if we can't have an honest discussion and say that some slaves were paid for their work,
eventually parlayed, being a blacksmith into doing things later in life.
One asks, how the hell did they manage that in a swamp? Okay, self-determination, of course, a proper community with rules, and in many cases, botany, right? They weren't just foraging either, right? Sure, they could find edible roots. There was blue lupine, wild persimmon, wild berries, muscadine grapes, blackberries, cane, alder. even cattails, plenty of cattails, all kinds of things gave them insect repellent, right? And they could even make bread from acorns and various other plants, but they also grew their own. They chose this isolated self-sufficiency and were determined to need nothing from the outside world. With ash and animal poop, they turned bad swamp soil into crops of corn, squash, rice in the wetter regions, sunflowers, melons, and so on. They even kept beehives for honey and for candle wax. They basically turned a mosquito-infested swamp into an off-grid, self-sufficient survival commune, if you will. And obviously, this is not easy, right? But it shows determination and far more intelligence than I got, right? In fact, these gardens were even used not just to grow provisions for themselves, they supported escapes or even uprisings. Yeah, black people weren't just sitting there 200 years waiting for Abe Lincoln to show up, right? They were fighting back. Did that make it into the history books? Yeah, I mean, being in the swamp and all, is that why so many of my black friends refuse camping, right? Or, as one of them put it, you're pretending you're homeless for 2 days? Yeah, man, I don't know. Maybe it's generational trauma from having to live in a swamp with mosquitoes, so many mosquitoes. Just a thought. It didn't hurt either that slave catchers avoided the swamp because they couldn't survive it, right? Dense brush made visibility sometimes less than 10 yards, and there were things that bit you, right? I cannot mention the mosquitoes enough. Mosquitoes. It was kind of like the ecosystem itself became an accomplice to their freedom. Multiple rebellions launched from there. And yes, I said accomplice, not ally. Big difference if you're curious about that. And this is not just in this swamp. All across the South, there were communities like this. Even a few hundred miles north, you could find borderland Maroons living on the edge of swampy areas and, raiding farms when they could for supplies or visiting relatives when being able to slip away to safety. And I mean, that's where people like Harriet Tubman passed through the Blackwater marshes of Maryland. She learned a lot of these botany and survival skills from her father, right? And then applied them to the Underground Railroad, getting people to safety, right? But now, let's fast forward to the 20th century. Because, this is when slavery was gone. Racism was alive and well, still is. And black farmers faced loan denial, land theft, discriminatory USDA policies, violence, zoning barriers. So naturally, they innovated again. Ever heard of CSAs? The whole farm direct-to-consumer thing? Some people claim it started in Japan, or it was some, Austrian dude, post-World War II European thing. But someone beat y'all to that idea. Let's talk about an agricultural educator named Booker T. Whatley. And back in the 1960s, this man basically said, hey, you know what, white people? I'm done playing those stupid games. I'm going to go create my own, right? And he told small black farmers, hey, stop trying to compete with those big, white industrial farms, getting all of the loans, by the way. Just go straight to the consumer. Grow what you will sell. No middleman. And, hey, maybe do it with a conscience, right? They were pick your own farms. There was direct marketing and community-supported agricultural models. So, yeah, he basically predicted or anticipated farmer markets and CSA boxes and agritourism, Decades later, what white America came along and called a sustainable food movement, right? Throw it on Instagram. $40 a box. Get back to your roots, they say. Yeah. And I'm sure there are some black people out there probably saying, congrats, you discovered, survival, because it was, we did it because the grocery store was 3 towns away and, wouldn't even let us in. And I bet you think that, things got better from there. there was a reason Whatley had his great idea because, well, let's start with back in 1920. Black Americans owned about 14% of U.S. farmland. I mean, that's roughly 16 million acres. But by 1997, less than 2%. Why? What happened? Well, for decades, the USDA, the government agency, supposedly there to help all farmers, well, they had a funny little habit of denying loans to black farmers, approving loans to white farmers for the same land. I mean, remember the old joke that banks are places that lend money if you can prove you don't need it? They foreclosed faster on black-owned farms than white. They notoriously lost paperwork and even scheduled office hours for when black farmers couldn't attend, right? We're here to help. It's just general bureaucratic racism. And it was so systematic, so documented, so undeniable that in 1999, Timothy Pigford and fellow black farmers, they took legal action. The federal government was forced to admit it in court. The Pigford v. Glickman lawsuit resulted in the largest civil rights settlement in U.S. history at that time. Over $1 billion paid to black farmers who could prove discrimination. Sounds like justice, right? Yeah, not so much. Thousands of farmers could not prove it because the USDA had lost their records. The same agency that discriminated against them, they also controlled the paper trail. It's convenient, right? Okay, but we fixed it since then, right? Problem solved. Yeah, so that settlement happened in 1999. And it wasn't until 2010 that Congress tried to fix numerous problems, and it still fell short of what was owed. The process was a burden. Paperwork still lost. Many farmers, they still got nothing. And by the way, we've also never solved the underlying systemic problems at all, right? In fact, we are now watching those efforts and programs to address this problem, like debt relief for socially disadvantaged farmers, get challenged, defunded, eliminated. And the argument is that helping black farmers specifically is reverse discrimination? Yeah, let me get this right. So a century of systemic land theft, not discrimination, but trying to fix that problem, yeah, that's discrimination. The math ain't mathin', right? So next time you hear about DEI programs being dismantled or farm subsidies being cut, I don't know, look at whose hands that land was often stolen from. And maybe, just maybe, I don't know, go find a black-owned farm near you and buy $40 box of vegetables. It's like resistance you can eat. Oh, and the people with the most resilient agricultural knowledge, the descendants of those dooryard gardens, those swamp survivalists and farmers who thrived in spite of policy designed to destroy them, yeah, they're still fighting for loans, for the right to work the land that their great-grandparents had and lost or maybe held on to, despite being stolen from and being sharecropped and getting shut out of owning anything, right? Because I'm sorry, but 40 acres and a mule was a scam. And I don't think history forgot these stories. It edited them, right? We did start adding them back in, but the people in power are trying to redact them again. Like, I don't know, some other files out there maybe? Plants grow resistance to the elements. So do people, right? And resistance thrives on informed anger. So, hey, if you learned something today, subscribe. And if you're mad, good, use it, right? And subscribe anyway, because photosynthesis, it thrives on sunlight. And this channel thrives on attention. So stay green, stay curious, and this is Twigsy.